the Scarecrow. Jacob had been admitted to the asylum decades ago. No one knew the cause of his catatonic state, only that he was found that way one day in the fields near his farmhouse. The new device recently purchased by the hospital would give the doctors the insight into Jacob's state of mind that likely left him like this. Blankly staring ahead, unresponsive, a shadow across his face and a tinge of fear in his eyes. The mystery surrounding Jacob led to him becoming a bit of a celebrity with the staff over the years. Most had heard or speculated on some horrible event that might have done this to him. So excitement buzzed through the asylum staff because the new device would allow them to view Jacob's mind on a screen, as though watching a movie from his point of view. And the administration decided they would allow everyone to watch as they fired up the new device for the first time, and finally answered the mystery of Jacob's affliction. Jacob was attached to the machine and the auditorium was packed with every staff member. The screen turned on and the story began. As Jacob finished working his field for the day, he glanced at his Scarecrow. For years, he had relied on that Scarecrow to keep the crows away from his crops. Each morning, when he trudged out to the field, the Scarecrow stood tall in the same spot, an unsettling figure made of old rags, straw, and an empty burlap sack for a head. But recently, things had changed. At first, it was small. The Scarecrow would be a few feet to the left of where it had been the day before. Jacob thought nothing of it. Perhaps the wind had shifted it, or maybe a stray animal had nudged it. But as the days went on, the Scarecrow's position seemed to shift farther and farther. It moved to different corners of the field, sometimes appearing near the fence, sometimes near the barn, always at a distance far too far for Jacob to believe the wind was responsible. One evening, frustrated and growing suspicious, Jacob decided to stake out the field. He set up a small camp near the edge of the crops, hidden under the cloak of night. He'd seen kids from the nearby village hanging around his farm before, laughing, whispering, and throwing stones at his Scarecrow. He assumed they were the culprits, playing pranks perhaps. He waited, eyes straining, as the night grew colder. The sounds of crickets filled the air, and the occasional rustle of wind through the tall crops kept him alert. Hours passed, and Jacob's patience began to wear thin. Just as he was about to give up, he saw something. A figure, moving in the darkness of the field. The Scarecrow wasn't in its usual spot. Jacob's heart raced. The kids, he thought. How had he missed it being taken down? He followed the movement, moving quietly, but keeping his eyes fixed on the spot where he saw the silhouette. It seemed to be coming closer, just beyond the row of crops. He crept forward, adrenaline rushing through his veins. There was no sound, just the soft rustle of feet in the grass. The figure passed through a sliver of moonlight and Jacob froze. The Scarecrow was standing upright, directly facing him. Jacob's blood ran cold. His mouth went dry as he scanned the figure under the dim light of the moon. It was exactly as it always had been. Ragged straw limbs, an empty burlap sack for a face. But something felt wrong. Then the Scarecrow moved. It wasn't just swaying in the wind as it always had. No, it shifted on its own. Jacob's breath hitched. His mind screamed that it was impossible. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't. But it was. The Scarecrow, with unnatural slowness, began to advance toward him, its stiff limbs jerking with mechanical precision. Jacob stumbled back in terror, tripping, falling backwards, his thoughts racing. He wanted to scream, to run, but his limbs felt like stone. He couldn't take his eyes off the thing as it grew closer. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. The moonlight cast eerie shadows, and the Scarecrow's face, its burlap sack face, shifted with every step. As it neared, Jacob felt the air grow colder. The field, once full of life and sound, was now eerily silent. Finally, the Scarecrow paused, standing over Jacob. The ragged sack that formed its face stared at him, its empty eye holes now seeming to glow with a hollow black emptiness. Jacob's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His mind screamed in terror, but his body wouldn't move. He attempted to scramble backward, and then, without warning, the Scarecrow leaned in, face to face. And Jacob saw something in those dark holes. At first, it was just a flicker, like a shadow passing through the burlap. But then it grew. It began to form into something unnatural, something wrong. What he saw was so far beyond the realm of comprehension that it shattered his sanity in an instant. The face behind the burlap sack was not human, nor animal. It was something else. It was a twisted, writhing mass of horrors, a grotesque amalgamation of nightmares that defied all logic. It stared at him, and within those endless, pulsing black eyes, Jacob saw every dark thing that had ever been, and every unspeakable thing that could never be. The world around him warped. The field seemed to distort, twisting into impossible shapes. Jacob's mind snapped, unable to process what it had just witnessed. His body went cold, his limbs locked in place. His thoughts became an incoherent mess. In that moment, Jacob's mind shattered like glass. He collapsed, his body becoming nothing more than a lifeless husk, staring blankly into the horror before him. The Scarecrow stood there for a moment longer, watching. Then, just as silently as it had appeared, it turned and slowly shuffled back into the field, vanishing into the darkness, leaving Jacob locked into a nightmare he would never wake from. As the auditorium full of staff experienced Jacob's final moments of sanity, they finally learned the cause of his mysterious condition and joined him. Every set of eyes staring blankly ahead, mouths open and twisted, trapped in the same horrible dream.